Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Friday the 16th of June. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 478 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition, and then I will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Explosions have been reported in Ukraine's capital as South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and other African leaders were in Kyiv to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky as part of a peace initiative. The leaders are due to head to Moscow to meet Vladimir Putin tomorrow. Head of the office of the Ukrainian presidency, Andriy Yermak, has said the Russian missile attack took place just when the leaders of African countries arrived in the capital. Putin wants to demonstrate that he is willing to disregard the safety of foreign leaders. He actually doesn't care because he feels complete impunity. Kyiv's mayor reported an explosion in the Podolsky district of the city, while an air alert was declared across much of Ukraine after reports of Kalibr-style cruise missiles being launched from Russia's Black Sea Fleet. According to information provided by the Ukrainian Air Force, the city's defences shot down 6 Kinzhal ballistic missiles, 6 Kalibr cruise missiles, and 2 reconnaissance drones. Kherson's regional authority has said that 1,649 houses and 17 settlements on the right bank of the Dnipro River remain flooded after the collapse of the Kakhovka Dam. 17 settlements on the opposite bank, which is occupied by Russian forces, also remain flooded. Colonel General Alexander Syrsky has posted a video which claims to show Ukrainian forces taking out Russian positions near the town of Bakhmut. Russian troops who have destroyed German-made Leopard tanks and US-supplied armoured vehicles being used in Ukraine will receive bonus payments, the Russian Defence Ministry said today. 150 children have been illegally taken from the Luhansk region to Russia, according to Ukraine's National Resistance Center. Ukraine has regained more control of more than 100 square kilometers of territory in its counter-offensive, the senior Ukrainian military commander, Brigadier General Oleksiy Hromov, has claimed. The Deputy Defence Minister, Hanna Maliar, said there was a gradual but steady advance, but that Russian forces were putting up powerful resistance on the southern front. Rafael Grossi, the UN nuclear regulator chief, has said that the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is serious, but a number of measures have been taken to stabilise it. After visiting Europe's largest atomic power plant, Mr. Grossi said that inspectors would stay at the Russian-occupied facility, but that signing a document on security on the site was unrealistic, while the two sides were still fighting, but the need to ensure water for cooling the plant was a priority. Gunfire briefly halted Grossi's convoy as it headed back to Ukrainian-held territory following his visit to the Zaporizhzhia plant, but the delegation was in no immediate danger, a spokesperson for the International Atomic Energy Agency said. And the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg has said that Ukrainian fighter pilots are being trained to fly F-16 jets. However, NATO allies have yet to agree on delivering the US fighter jets to Ukraine. Boris Johnson committed a clear breach of rules on former ministers taking up new jobs by telling an appointments body he was becoming a Daily Mail columnist only half an hour before the public announcement, the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments, ACOBA, has said. The former Prime Minister was unveiled as a new writer for the paper, a platform he is expected to use to be a thorn in the side of Rishi Sunak. However, Johnson has already become embroiled in a fresh breach of the ministerial code after it emerged that he had waited until almost the very last minute before the public announcement to inform ACOBA. A spokesperson said, "The ministerial code states that ministers must ensure that no new appointments are announced or taken up before the committee has been able to provide its advice. An application received 30 minutes before an appointment is announced is a clear breach. We have written to Mr. Johnson for an explanation and will publish correspondence in due course in line with our policy of transparency." The Mail unveiled Johnson earlier today and said his first column would appear earlier this afternoon. only a day after a damning report found he had deliberately misled the House of Commons and was part of a campaign to intimidate the MPs who investigated him. The paper's announcement was accompanied by a video in which Johnson said the column would be about exactly what I think about the world. Earlier, Eric Pickles, the chair of ACOBA, said he would be writing to Johnson to seek clarification on whether he was taking a job as a Daily Mail columnist. Speculation had been prompted by today's Daily Mail front page, which said that it would shortly unveil an erudite new columnist. Former ministers who have left the government in the past 2 years must apply to ACOBA before taking up a new appointment or role. In the past, Johnson was paid a salary of £275,000 to write for The Telegraph. He previously faced censure from ACOBA after he failed to seek advice from the committee before joining The Telegraph. That was after he resigned as Theresa May's Foreign Secretary. ACOBA is also consulted as part of the propriety checks on those nominated for honours and peerages, to examine if those in line for them have sought ACOBA's advice in line with the rules. However, these rules do not apply to those who have made the nominations in the first place. The SNP has challenged Douglas Ross to whip Scottish Tory MPs to vote for the Privileges Committee sanctions against the disgraced former Prime Minister next week. The SNP accused the Scottish Tory leader of being weak over his repeated flip-flopping support of Boris Johnson. Mr Ross has so far refused to give any direction to the Scottish Tory MPs, with Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack among those who might refuse to back the Privileges Committee report and recommendations. Responding to questions from journalists, Mr Ross said that he was not going to start guessing how other people might vote. With Mr Ross's own position under threat from discontented Tory MSPs, SNP Westminster Deputy Leader Barry Black MP challenged the Scottish Tory leader to back further sanctions against Boris Johnson, including scrapping his honours list, ending his publicly funded former Prime Minister's allowance, and recouping the legal fees he has charged to the taxpayer. Commenting, Barry Black said, Douglas Ross must finally grow a backbone and whip his MPs to vote for tough sanctions against his disgraced former leader, Boris Johnson. It is well known that Mr Ross lacks authority with Scottish Tory MSPs and MPs who are discontent with his poor leadership. He might be desperate to avoid a leadership challenge, but failing to whip his MPs will only make him look even weaker. Mr Ross can't hide from the fact that he and his Tory colleagues put a serial liar into number 10 and repeatedly backed Johnson despite all the damage he inflicted on Scotland. He must finally do the right thing and get behind SNP calls for tough sanctions, including scrapping Johnson's corrupt honours list, ending his taxpayer-funded allowance, and recouping his legal fees. Johnson might have left Parliament, but the toxic legacy of Westminster continues, with yet another out-of-touch Tory Prime Minister imposing Brexit, cuts, and a tax on Scottish devolution. The new leader of Plaid Cymru, Rhun ap Iorwerth, has promised to get the party back on track and make it a welcoming place for everyone after its misogyny and harassment scandal. Despite strong calls within the party for the new leader to be a woman, ap Iorwerth was announced as a leader at an event at Cardiff Bay, as the only candidate who put their name forward. Rhun ap Iorwerth represents Ynys Môn, Anglesey in the Senedd, and is a former journalist. He was a deputy leader until Price stepped down. He's married and has 3 children. Rhun ap Iorwerth said, I will be uncompromising in making this a welcoming party where everyone feels safe and supported and empowered to play their part. We've had an excellent woman leader in the past, Leanne Wood. We'll have women leaders in the future. We have an excellent leader at Westminster in Liz Saville-Roberts. Adam Price resigned as Plaid leader last month after a report found a culture of sexual harassment, bullying and misogyny, and made 82 recommendations of ways to detoxify the party. Ap Iorwerth said the party was at a difficult junction, but the report meant it had a way forward. We have a roadmap, recommendations that have already started to be implemented. He said the cooperation agreement with Labour in the Welsh Senedd would continue, but took a swipe at Labour's record on the NHS, saying its record in health had trashed trust in the delivery of public services. He said he could not imagine working with the Tories and claimed that Boris Johnson's lies had undermined trust in politics. Rhyn ap Iorwerth said he hoped Wales would become independent in his lifetime and said he was keen to win over the curious and the sceptics, as well as working with committed pro-independence supporters. The SNP has accused the UK government of creating a housing nightmare for young people, as the average interest rate on a 2-year fixed mortgage looks set to breach 6%. Financial information service Moneyfacts confirmed the typical mortgage rate rose to 5.98% from today, including two of the UK's biggest lenders, Nationwide and NatWest Group. SNP Levelling Up Housing and Communities spokesperson Chris Stevens MP warned that UK government inaction would end the dream of one day owning a home for millions of young people. Chris Stevens said, "The UK government has created a housing nightmare for young people. There can be no more delays from the UK government. It is essential that they take radical action now to support struggling households. By failing to act quickly, they will soon end the dream of millions of young people of one day owning a home." MPs have urged the government to set out its plans to protect households from high energy bills this winter, as they said about 1.7 million people, including some of the most vulnerable groups, had been left waiting too long to receive previous support. The House of Commons Public Accounts Committee, PAC, said that although schemes were introduced quickly, the government did not have the bandwidth to make sure help reached all groups in a timely fashion. The cross-party group said it had serious concerns about the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero's lack of urgency in addressing the energy market failures that are leading to high energy bills for customers. PAC's chair, Meg Hillier, said, "The surge in energy prices has caused serious difficulties and hardship for households across the UK. It is of course welcome to see government moving quickly to put in place support for both households and businesses to keep the lights on, but many of those who needed help were what kept waiting longest for it. For some households, every day left without support presented impossible choices." About 900,000 households without a direct relationship to a domestic energy supplier, such as those in park homes or living in boats, became eligible for the Energy Bill Support Scheme only in late February, almost 5 months after consumers began receiving discounts on the main scheme. The committee urged the government to provide an update on its plans to ensure there is affordable energy for households this winter. By the end of April, £160 million of energy support vouchers for households using traditional prepayment meters had not been redeemed. The UK is in danger of being left behind in the global race to decarbonise the economy, with potentially disastrous consequences for jobs and communities, according to the TUC's General Secretary. Paul Nowak has said that the UK was limping towards a green future, and he called for a national collective effort involving employers, workers and the government to ensure a quick and fair transition to a net zero economy. All of our unions are signed up to delivering net zero, from schools to hospitals to the steel industry. Our members are working day in and day out to make sure this transition happens and is done in a way that is fair and just, he said. The role of trade unions in the UK's net zero transition hits the headlines this month when the leader of the GMB, Gary Smith, criticised Labour's plan to ban oil and gas expansion, saying it was naive. Smith said the party had got it wrong, and that his members had been promised tens of thousands of jobs in renewable energy time and time again, but that they simply have not emerged. Nowak declined to be drawn into the row, but said it underlined the need for workers, including those in the oil and gas industry, to have a seat at the table to shape concrete plans for the future. He said change must be done with people rather than to them if the country was to avoid a rerun of the devastation caused by Thatcherite deindustrialisation of the 1980s. He said an ideological aversion to state action meant the current UK Tory government, unlike its counterparts in the US and Europe, was failing to set a coherent strategy to decarbonise, instead leaving the issue to fractured, market-led interventions. I just don't think you can leave these huge industrial transformations to the market and think everything is just going to work out. We are limping towards a green future rather than having a government with a real sense of purpose, he said. Rescuers have launched the third and final day of their search for survivors of one of the Mediterranean's worst boat disasters, as authorities detain 9 suspected people smugglers and criticism of Greece's initial response mounted. The Greek Coast Guard said on Friday a helicopter, a frigate, and 3 smaller vessels were searching waters 50 miles from the southern town of Pylos, where the fishing boat, reportedly carrying between 400 and 750 people, sank on Wednesday. Greek authorities have confirmed 78 deaths and said 104 survivors, mostly from Syria, Egypt, and Pakistan, have been brought ashore, but police believe as many as 500 are missing, with witnesses saying up to 100 children were in the ship's hold. Most of the survivors were being moved to shelters near Athens from a warehouse at the southern port of Kalamata. No more had been found since Wednesday, and officials said the search would be halted later today. The UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has called the disaster a horrific tragedy, adding that the loss of life underlined the need to bring people smugglers to justice and calling on states to open up more regular migration channels. Greek authorities were criticised for not acting earlier, despite a Coast Guard vessel escorting the boat for hours. Officials said people on the boat repeatedly refused assistance and insisted on continuing to Italy, but legal experts said that was no excuse. Professor Erik Roseg of the University of Oslo's Institute of Private Law said maritime law would have required Greek authorities to attempt a rescue if the boat was unsafe, regardless of whether those on board requested it. Greek authorities had a duty to start rescue procedures, given the condition of the trawler, Roseg told Associated Press, adding that a captain's refusal of assistance could be overruled if deemed unreasonable, which he said this appeared to be. Under its recent Conservative government, Greece has taken a far harder stance on migration, building walled camps and boosting border controls. The country is currently governed by a caretaker administration, pending an election on the 25th of June. Alexis Tsipras, who was Prime Minister from 2015 to 2019 at the peak of Europe's migration crisis, said on Thursday the immigration policy that Europe has been following for years turns the Mediterranean, our seas, into watery graves. The EU has called Serbian and Kosovan leaders to Brussels for crisis talks after raised tensions sparked fears of violence between the two countries. EU leaders have already intervened on several occasions in recent weeks to try and de-escalate the situation, but after the arrest of Kosovan police officers by Serbia earlier this week, they want face-to-face talks. In the light of ongoing escalation and the lack of meaningful steps towards this coalition, we invited both leaders from Serbia, from Kosovo, to come to Brussels next week for a crisis meeting, said a spokesperson for Josep Borrell, the European Commission's High Representative for Foreign Policy. The invitation was issued to the Kosovan Prime Minister Albin Kurti and the Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, he added. Tensions mounted last month between the countries after Pristina's decision to install ethnic Albanian mayors in 4 Serb-majority municipalities. They were allowed to take office despite a turnout of lower than 3.5% in elections that were boycotted by the Serbian majority in the region. 2 weeks ago, the French and German leaders Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz urged Kosovo to hold fresh elections to halt the crisis after a standoff between the two countries' leaders at the political summit in Moldova. Concerns about the tensions were heightened this week when 3 Kosovan police officers were detained near the Serbian border. Kurti accused Serbia of trying to take revenge for the arrest of a Serb who allegedly organised the violence that injured more than 20 NATO troops, journalists and police on the 29th of May. Serbia denied Kosovo's claim that the officers were kidnapped, saying the men were apprehended in Serbia. Josep Borrell's spokesperson said, "We are aware of the arrest of Kosovo policemen by Serbian authorities. We are in touch with both parties and KFOR, the NATO-led peacekeeping force, in order to find out exactly what happened and how it happened. It is very important to have clarification of what happened and how it happened. Until then, we are urging both sides not to take any more action or reaction that could further fuel the already tense situation. Kosovo declared independence from Serbia in 2008, but Belgrade and its allies Beijing and Moscow have refused to recognise it, effectively preventing Kosovo from having a seat at the UN. Transport Scotland has confirmed the fares increase it will put in place for 2023. Following an extended fares freeze in Scotland, from July fares will increase by 4.8%. This excludes season and flexi tickets, which remain frozen at current prices, ensuring those who use rail frequently are encouraged to continue. This is substantially lower than inflation and below recent rises in incomes. They are also lower than increases elsewhere in the UK, where fares recently increased by almost 6%. Scottish Government ministers say they have agreed these fares after lengthy consideration to ensure rail services are sustainable in the longer term and that budgets align with the overall funding available. Mary McCallan, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Net Zero and Just Transition, said the Scottish Government rightly made the decision to freeze fares as part of its response to the cost of living crisis. While this has now remained in place for around 18 months, it is simply no longer sustainable. From the 3rd of July 2023, ScotRail fares will increase by 4.8%. Compared to 5.9% fare rises across the rest of Great Britain, current RPI of 8.7%, and the August 2022 RPI rate of 12.3%. This fares rise does not include season tickets and flexi passes, which will remain frozen at current prices, ensuring those who use rail frequently are not discouraged from continuing to do so. And the global premiere of a new work by the Glasgow-based British-Finnish artist and composer Hanna Tuulikki is to be performed at Glasgow Cathedral later this year. Commissioned by Historic Environment Scotland with Arts and Heritage, Tuulikki's extraordinary new musical composition, The Bird That Never Flew, explores the ancient cathedral's roots in ornithological entanglements, bringing together sacred lament and ecological political protest to raise the alarm for critically endangered birds and the impact of climate change. Taking place live on Friday the 8th of September and Saturday the 9th of September, the innovative piece will be performed by Tuulikki alongside the award-winning Scottish vocalist Misha McPherson and the Glasgow-based voice and sound artist Lucy Duncombe. Drawing on sacred music traditions, myth and ecology, Tuulikki's new composition for 3 voices, field recordings and electronics weaves together what the robin knows of the past, present and future. With its distinctive red breast and warbling song, the European robin plays a prominent role in the life of Glasgow's patron saint, St Mungo, who is said to have brought a dead bird back to life by holding it in his hands, smoothing its feathers, and praying until the lifeless creature revived. In a time where the numbers of wild birds in Britain have declined drastically, Mungo's story of empathy with nature prompts us to reconsider how we might support other species faced with the dangers of climate change. Claire Whitebread, HES's exhibitions manager who commissioned the piece, said, "We are delighted to announce this powerful, visually and orally stunning work by Hanna, which melds the historic and the contemporary into an engaging, evocative performance played out in one of Scotland's much-loved historic sites." Commenting on the work, the artist and composer Hanna Tuulikki said, "As a starting point for the composition, I ask, what if we were able to translate the alarm calls of birds into human language and discovered these signals were alerting all beings to the destruction of the earth? What if these alarm calls were a collective call to rise and to protest?" And that is all that we have for you this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the generous support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station and to make new programmes. Our programmes will always be free to view, But if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of raising £30,000 in order that we can continue to pay the bills. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot, and you can send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. We will be back at 12 noon sharp on Sunday with the next edition of The Full Scottish, so please come back and join us then. Meanwhile, please have a very peaceful weekend. Bye-bye.